If you're an HR professional who works hard to fill roles within your company, keep employees engaged, and build company culture, welcome to America Back to Work, where dreams only work if we do. We'll share wide-ranging issues surrounding pre-employment background screening, HR topics such as recruiting, hiring, labor trends, and company culture, as well as broader HR-influenced business topics such as customer experience, service level excellence, and protecting what matters through best practices in prevention, protection, and corporate security. America Back to Work is brought to you by S2 Verify. Here's your host, Arnette Heintze.
Welcome to America Back to Work, brought to you by S2 Verify, where our purpose is to help you hire with confidence and manage insider risk. I'm your host, Arnette Heintze. Thank you for joining. Today, our guest is Mike Sarraille. Mike is a retired U.S. Navy SEAL officer who earned his MBA from the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas. He is the founder and CEO of the Talent Work Group, which is a leadership development, talent, and HR consulting firm. Mike is a sought-after public speaker and a well-respected thought leader and subject matter expert on leadership and human performance. In 2020, Mike became a best-selling author with the release of The Talent War: How Special Operations and Great Organizations Win on Talent. Mike, it's really a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining. Before we get into your book and also our discussion today, would you tell us a little bit about your transition from the Navy? I know you spent a full career in the Navy, and then you've moved into, the private sector. What challenges, what bridges did you cross to make that transition?
I think the better question is, what challenges didn't I face? That list is probably a lot shorter. I had the fortunate pleasure of going into an MBA program right before I retired. And it was a good 2-year break for me. An opportunity. I was an old man in the program, 39. Most of the kids were young men, women were 27. I think that was the average age. So they were much smarter than me. To start picking up a set of skills that we traditionally don't use in the military or special operations. And it allowed me to look at a lot of industries, but it's not a lack of vocabulary, but there's no better way to say it. The transition out of the military just sucks. There's no way to sugarcoat it. You're leaving a society that has its own cultural subset that is different from the civilian sector or private sector, or whatever we want to call it. And there's almost a gullibility and naivety amongst military members to think that they can find that type of environment again in the private sector. There's just, it operates differently, it values different things, and you've got to learn that the hard way. So very few veterans hit the dream job like a bullet on the bullseye on the first go around. It usually takes 5 different jobs in different industries to find where they find that right cultural fit. But I took a job at Texas A&M first as the executive director of all veteran services for all, I think it was 12 campuses, and that wasn't going to be a fit. Then I worked for a leadership development firm, which I was appreciative of, but had a different perspective on leadership. So wrote my own book and left The Talent War, How Special Operations and Great Organizations Win on Talent. And then I've dove into entrepreneurship, hired by Men's Journal to run one of their biggest initiatives, which allows me to do content. Started Legacy Expeditions and about to relaunch, in a sense, a mindset apparel brand. So I've really focused in on helping others and driving impact through valuable content or books, doing the leadership development. And then we also, within Talent War Group, have an executive search side where we go find senior leaders to general management levels.
Well, your observations about the challenges of leaving a career like the Navy and the SEALs is so spot on. I had the same impact when I retired from the Secret Service. And frankly, because I've been retired actually longer than I was in the Secret Service. I was in the Secret Service for 20 years, and I'm going into retirement now for about 21 years. But I tell all the men and women that are retiring today, the biggest thing they're going to miss is the people. It's not the job per se. It's just the people. And it's really a people industry. And I think your transition, going through the private sector now, I'd like to hone in a little bit about the elements of your military experience and how that's influenced your private sector approach.
Yeah, I mean, even to the point where I've created a business operating system within Talent Group with the help of other military vets who've done extremely well in the private sector. We call it the Strata 6 operating system. And everything I do, because most like the Secret Service is still part of your DNA, the military will always be part of my DNA. And I was very proud in the special operations community and serving in JSOC, which is the elite within the elite that just operated at a different level. That's just fact, given the missions that they handle. We do operations very well. Not to say that some companies are cutting edge. And quite frankly, even when I was in JSOC, we would do leadership exchanges with very premier warriors within their respective professions, like Bill Campbell, the secret coach of Silicon Valley, Sergey Brin, Larry Ellison, trading secrets of how they run these cutting edge organizations. We were always on the hunt for best practices. But the biggest missing factor within the private sector is the ability to create truly aligned, high-performing teams to create this sense of pride and camaraderie within the business place that keeps people there, that drives loyalty, that drives performance. And so, there's a lot that this special operations does well that the business sector doesn't. This is one of those things. And there's a lot of things that the business sector does well that the military doesn't do well, and quite frankly, could learn. And we were always an open door, for the most part, to the public when we identified somebody that did something well and said, hey, show us your methodology, show us your strategy, your approach. We'd like to see if we can integrate that into special operations and how we conduct business. And we do also have endless budgets. We also do have the premier onboarding process the private sector can't replicate. 3 months in officer candidate school 24/7 or boot camp 3 months 24/7, in which people understand the history of the organization, the values that they hold dear, the code, the behaviors that demonstrate those values. How that it's a culture of accountability, and accountability is not a negative thing. It is the mechanism through which we understand you're and you're going to make failures. That is the springboard accountability, the springboard to learning and growth. And we've found some success. I want to make it more successful of pairing with companies to bring that methodology, not yelling at people like you see some SEALs do. They run boot camps where they yell at people. That at JSOC, that was not acceptable. Guys were older. They were more mature, high in intellectual horsepower. And it was... It's met with some success in the organizations who partner with us for long-term relationships. You start to see the culture change, not overnight, but over time.
So let's drill into, SF leadership. And, I think some of the tenets, there's so many great elements of leadership training in the military. But if you look at some of the tenets that maybe the private sector could reach into and kind of adopt some of those, what are a few of them that you would suggest?
The best way to look at the military and special operations is it is one big leadership incubator. And it's not that we're tactically superior to our enemies abroad. It's that we produce better leaders, and better leaders that we build trust with and then pass as much authority to them as possible. But I'm blanking on his name. He's a West Point graduate, retired as a general, but he stood up the Leadership Development Center at West Point. Now he works at Rice University, which was a leadership program backed by John Doerr, in which freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors are all required at Rice University to go through leadership development, personal growth. They not only produce practitioners in every industry, they now produce leaders in every industry. He wrote a great article about saying how the military per capita produces more leaders than the private sector, because it is a progressive sequential series of training events, coaching and mentoring, and experiential experiences to bring the best out of people, to push them to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. When we push people to their mental and physical comfort limits within risk mitigation, that's where true character emerges. Subsequently, it's also where true learning and growth take place. Additionally, we push authority down to the lowest level. After we know that the person is equipped to do the job, They built trust. We let them run with it. And that is the tenet of what we call decentralized command, pushing authority down to the lowest level. And then lastly, transformational leadership, which is, it's a big buzzword. A lot of people grab onto it because Harvard did an article on it, and that's great. Transformational leadership, if you ask a lot of leaders in the private sector, you'll get a wide array of answers. And they're all right because people are entitled to their perspectives and experiences. But within the military, transformational leadership means turning the compliant who just follow you simply because your title is boss or leader into the willing. So turning the compliant into the willing, meaning people follow you for who you are and what you stand for, and that you actually follow through on your word. You set the example through your actions. And a lot of the companies, quite frankly, we have senior leaders that don't emulate the example. Look at Enron, for example. It's a perfect example. Though money is sort of not a variable within the military, the pay is set. We need leaders, especially look at, and you coming, this from the national capital region. We need our senior leaders in government setting the example. It's observational modeling. It's behavioral modeling. I mean, people will see what people will be what people can see. And they're always watching their leaders to see if they hold true to their word or if they follow the mantra of rules for thee, not for me. And so that's one of the major components of when we come into companies is we've got to get the leaders to stand up, to set the example, to work harder, to sacrifice in order to build the next generation of leaders below them, because that's where your true legacy is. Not only to drive outcomes when you're in the leadership seat, but to leave a unbroken chain of excellence that when you leave that organization, it doesn't flail. It accelerates at a quicker rate.
Yeah. What was the program that John Doerr was backed that you mentioned? Which one?
At Rice University, and I'm looking it up as we speak.
I've known John about 15 years. He's such a tremendous leader and inspirational driver on so many fronts. And when he finished his book, Measuring What Matters, which is a book I would recommend to every business leader. I mean, he sent it to me before it was published, and it's tremendous. And it's one that businesses will succeed if they follow his guidance.
And so first off, I consider that one of my many Bibles for business, even for the military, but it's the Rice University Doerr Institute for New Leaders. And the fact that Rice has led the way with this, every university, when I stepped into the Texas MBA, of course, I'm a lieutenant commander, 20 years of experience. And I remember the dean talking about how they produce leaders. And, amongst all the students, I raised my hand and I said, "Hey, sir, how are you producing leaders?" And he couldn't give me a good answer. There was no curriculum. There was no pathway. And I said, "Hey, I think you're producing business practitioners, but I would caution you to say you're producing leaders, because quite frankly, 2 years is a pretty quick time. You don't have a leadership curriculum. You don't have a coaching and mentoring program. So you really have, it's great on a Hallmark card to say that. Just like every CEO says, oh, we put a precedence on talent, though they really don't do anything different than their competitors. So, you look at the Johnson & Johnsons of the world, who have probably one of the most premier leadership development programs in-house, all the way to human performance. They actually invest in their people. And a lot of companies don't do that. And I know Johnson & Johnson is a massive company, and they've got deep purses, but universities like Rice and Johnson & Johnson are creating world-class or best-in-class leadership development programs that other businesses need to replicate. We're either small companies or large companies. There's a total absence of any, let's say, institutionalized leadership development within companies.
So if we look at that military or warrior mindset and how they might benefit HR teams, are there, especially when it comes to getting a leg up on competition, are there a couple of points that you think worthy of mentioning?
First, it's the onboarding process. That's a big missed opportunity to sit down. And I'm not talking about ADP as your pay system and your 401k and Workday is how you submit for leave and your evaluations. I'm talking about the history of the company, the values of the company. Again, the behaviors associated with that, how they're going to be evaluated, what's expected of them, what their roles and responsibilities are. And very few companies take 2 to 3 days to sit down with their new hires and actually explain that. And if you do, within the first 90 days, you'll see a different level of performance if there are evaluation and feedback mechanisms in place. You'll see a higher performance out of your people. And again, it's pretty much non-existent within the private sector.
Yeah. One of the greatest talent pools that I've recruited from when I started my businesses back in 2004 was frankly targeting veterans. And I think the value of veterans are really undervalued in a lot of corporate structures because they bring so much to offer there. But when it comes to recruiting diverse candidates, what's your suggestion to companies as they're looking for diversity and maybe bringing that from the talent pools of veterans?
I'd love to say veterans are great hires. The right veteran is a great hire. I don't like to paint in broad brushstrokes to say all veterans that we should paint them in rainbow colors. It's not the fact. Some people get out of the military and quite frankly didn't serve with distinction. And God bless them for still serving our country in their capacity. But when it comes to hiring for diversity, most people continue to hunt in the same talent pools that they're hunting. And again, we are in a strange talent market. COVID changed everything. First, you had the great resignation that people weren't making money, so it turned into the great regret. You've got remote work, which I've got an article coming out on remote work. I'm not a fan of it, but I think there's some sort of hybrid method that we have to accept as business leaders. Could you imagine if, as a Secret Service leader, you're given a team and they said, "Hey, you're going to have to do this remotely, train that team up"?
Doesn't work.
There's no innovation, there's no collaboration, there's no team building. You can't do that in a remote environment. Best of luck. But we also have, and I caution to say, some people just don't want to work hard anymore. I mean, you've got new kids coming out of college that in their interview, they say, "Hey, what's my equity vesting plan?" And you're like, "Are you kidding me? You're not vesting into any equity up front. Work hard for 5 years and we'll have a conversation in 5 years. Prove that you're a value add, that you insert more value than you extract from this organization." So, I worked with a company, let's just say they're in agriculture, and they're having difficulty in hiring. Their workforce is hurting. And at the end of that meeting, it came to the conclusion that they need to hunt new talent pools. Why aren't you hunting in urban cities and drawing those people to the Midwest where preponderance of your business is? Give them a different life, screen differently. We've even worked with law enforcement where law enforcement's having a tough 3 years. And of course, recruiting has fallen. So expanding their scope to new officers instead of eliminating people for what were traditionally red flags, make me look deeper into those red flags and say, "Hey, is there something within this young man or woman who's never experienced any coaching or mentorship that we can pull out of them and change who they are, change their past behaviors?" And so, you've got to get rid of these old molds and especially get rid of the misnomer that you think you know what talent looks like. No individual looks like talent, knows what talent looks like. I've made that mistake as a SEAL, thinking, "Oh, that kid will make it through buds and that kid won't." And I was wrong usually about 90% of the time.
In your book, you identified some principles that I think are tremendous, and share with us those principles of how you think an HR pro can better identify and nurture high potential leaders in their workforce, kind of following the principles you've laid out.
We are advocates for HR. I've had a lot of people read the book within HR and they said thank you. We're also the biggest critics of HR. So, if you look at the structure of an organization, the organization either puts a precedence on HR or they disincentivize it. What I mean by that is if your CHRO or VP of recruiting or human resources reports into legal, then it is a compliance function. If they report into the CFO, it's an overhead function. But if the CHRO reports directly to the CEO, there's a chance in hell that it's a strategic function. HR should be filled with A players. It should be filled with former sales leaders. It should be filled with high performers from different functions who know what A-type personalities are that can screen effectively for high performers, because high performers can identify high performers if they have a process, a systematic, evolving process behind them, a evolved process. So one, you've got to put high performers in HR. Two, some people fall, especially when the economy's booming, they sort of go with a butts and seats mentality because revenue's up, because consumer demand is up. They need to get more people into the organization. They throw their traditional set systematic hiring process to the side to get numbers in rapidly, and that rarely works out. And usually the worst outcome is you dilute your culture with people that never could have lived up to the standards and the values that you held dear. So those are a few of the principles, but who you have on your hiring team matters. If you have B and C players on your hiring team, they're gonna dismiss A players out of fear alone. We were very careful about who we put in charge of hiring within the SEAL hiring process, which we call assessment selection. It's known as the Basic Underwater Demolition School, because we want people who can set the example. Not only are you assessing the young men and women to potentially become SEALs, you're still representing the organization. You need to show them what right looks like. And a B or C player doesn't do that. So, I mean, we touched on a number of principles, but this takes time for leaders within an organization sitting down. It's starting to establish a process rather than saying, hey, 3 people interview them, let me know what you think, with no scorecard that delivers no data that can be replicated. And it's basically a just informal process. And they're going with their gut. And what does gut stand for? Gave up thinking.
That's great. I can't believe the time has flown by with us, but I would like to get into a strategy that you're bringing to the corporate world from the military, which is wild, extreme, experimental leadership training. At a high level, tell us a little bit about that.
So we run something. I've got an expedition company. So partnered with Downward Group, we run something called ITWX, Into the Wild Extreme. It's not all that extreme as in special operations assessment and selection. It's taking senior leadership teams in groups of 5 to 20 to a national park. And when you put people into the outdoors, people get a little mentally and physically uncomfortable. But it's meant to build teams. So we have them rotating roles. Somebody will navigate one day, somebody will be a team leader. And over the course of 5 days, they even have to come up with a plan as a team to set up the camp, to make food. We have fireside chats where you get people to be vulnerable. So it's this concept we know well within the military. You put people through hard training together or hardship. There's this concept known as shared adversity, from which homecoming, belonging, and esprit de corps or camaraderie are born. If people get vulnerable out there in under the sky, sleeping in tents in cold weather or hot weather, and they drop their guard, they show a little vulnerability. Vulnerability is a very, very critical. Google calls it psychological safety. It is an important concept in building trust, and we've had phenomenal results. In terms of net promoter score, 10 out of 10 across the board after people come out of what we call the field. They're a different team and they're different individuals.
Oh, that's fantastic. Mike, I could go on for hours with you here. I know you've got so many things on your plate these days with all the companies you're involved with. But before we sign off today, I'd like to ask you a final question that I ask every guest. And that is, if S2 Verify were to conduct a background investigation on you, would there be any surprises?
I had to lead a pretty clean life being in the special operations community as well as JSOC. I don't think there's any dirt or anything I'd be embarrassed of that's found. But hey, you don't know what you don't know, what's out there. And I'm sure there'd be a surprise or two, but nothing I'm not out there.
I know the requirements of your outfit and I know where you stand. So you'd pass with flying colors.
Yeah.
So Mike, just real quickly, share with our audience, or they might keep up with you and track what you're doing? What's your best place?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find us at talentwargroup.com. You can also find me at MikeSarraille.com. And then also, if people want to follow some of these expeditions that we're doing, we've got one documentary that's streaming, another one that's going to be in theaters. They can find us at legacyexpeditions.net. And of course, that organization fundraises for Fold of Honor, which provides educational scholarships to military families as well as first responders.
Tremendous. Thank you for that. And, before we sign off today, Mike, I'd like to pause for a minute and have my partners, Bill and Jim, join us from S2 Verify. If we set aside the federal oversight, compliance, regulatory issues for background screening, we also have almost every state has various requirements and compliance issues themselves, some more than others. And I know we touched on a couple of them, California, Illinois. Any particular compliance issues from states that you see arising a lot for clients to better understand?
Basically, California continues to, enact laws that are basically challenging the employers to have a safe hiring environment, but also follow the law, of California. There's just a lot of variation in what you can and can't do in California. And that's just one of many states. A lot of the states follow the FCRA. And so if you look at their language in their state laws, it's very similar to what is in the FCRA. Some states will go a little further, but I think, states like California, Oregon, Washington, some of the states on the East Coast, Massachusetts, there's just a lot of things you have to be careful of.
Yep. Jim, I know that many states have regulations governing the use of credit history in hiring decisions. Can you share with us states that do and don't? And is that anything that clients are asking for today?
That's another very good question. S2 Verify offers what's referred to in the industry as an employment credit report. Big picture definition of that is you're not garnering a credit score. Okay. The score has become, as you know, the way that any financial retailer or grantor of a credit benefit really looks for. They really don't even look at a credit report. They want a score and then they move on. In the world of employment, states like California is probably the leader on this topic. It's pushing hard on not to do away with the credit report, but to have a specific reason for ordering a credit report. Meaning the candidate has to be in a position where they have access or insight to what I would deem to be sensitive financial information. Number one. Number two, they've got to have access to what would be consumer data, credit card information, Social Security information that deals with credit. And kind of last but not least, they have access to cash or to assets that the firm would deem at risk if someone that had a poor credit standing or was in financial need had access to. There's only a handful of states nowadays that apply those rules. Most of our clients have no issue with it. They understand it. They're usually ordering a credit report when they've got someone in that category to begin with, and really not a challenge and not an issue. More focused though on the individual's ability and, for lack of a better term, whether there's anything in that credit report that would indicate a challenge or an issue for the job they're applying.
For our audience, please tune in next week when we continue our exploration of topics critical to success in HR. We'll see you then. And it goes without saying, let's get America back to work, because dreams only work if we do. Mike, thank you so much for joining. Great talking with you.
Thank you.
If you want to stay abreast of HR, recruiting, and hiring trends, tips, and tools, make sure you subscribe to America Back to Work. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review.